Joe, have you ever attempted to talk to a patient about smoking abstinence?
No, I actually talked to an anesthesiologist who was like, he's very earnest and he's almost a voice guy. He's like, it's an important question to ask. And now I ask it in my preoperative interviews. And I was like, I'm a bad person. I never, ever do that.
I mean, in the history of humankind, has anyone ever been talked out of smoking right before they have a procedure? Like, oh shit, I hadn't really thought about that until the CRNA or anesthesiologist mentioned it. Maybe I should stop smoking.
Welcome back to the number one podcast in anesthesia world, at least the one that talks about business and policy and performance issues. Randy Moore and Gary Keeling. How you guys doing? It's great to see you guys.
How you doing today, Joe?
Hey there.
Yeah, great.
Hey,
every day is a great day, man. Every day is a great day. It's not the Middle Ages. I don't live in the Middle East. Gary, you're looking good, man. Did you just get done with a client call?
I did. I had a call this morning, and I'm a CPA by trade, so we kind of are magnetic towards ties. I went right up against it, so I figured you wouldn't mind me trying to impress you today wearing a tie.
Of course not. Can you tell us who the client was? Do you want to share?
Oh, I'm not allowed to do that.
Not yet. Not until you sign them.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I'm like your number one. I'm the best former client you've ever had.
That's good.
I keep ringing your bell. And Randy, what's going on with you, man? How's Chicago?
It's currently smoky. There's the wildfires in Canada and Minnesota have created what I think is probably a toxic environment out there. So we're trying to minimize our outside activity. So between the lettuce diarrhea and the smog, it's been an interesting time here in the Chicagoland area. Not that I've had the lettuce diarrhea, but actively trying to avoid both. Yeah.
Yes, I am glad you have not had it. I'm glad. It's a great time to avoid salad.
Yeah, Pittsburgh's in the smoke as well, so it's even going that far down south. So we have the same issues here.
It's scary times, but hopefully it clears up soon for you guys. But let's get into the docket here. Always good to catch up a little bit, and we're all going to see each other in a few weeks in Boston. That'll be fun too. When we get more sophisticated, we'll do a live show. But let's get into the docket here today. Plenty of anesthesia news to talk about. First up on the docket is the state of Ohio. And on the screen, for those watching at home, is a woman named Kelly Dieter, who is the state representative from Huron County, population 55,000. So she is from way north Ohio, and there's a picture up there with Vivek Ramaswamy, the likely governor of Ohio, who's coming in. And current governor is DeWine. So just a little bit of context on this issue. Representative Dieter, who is a CRNA by training and background, passed or authored House Bill 52, which changed the word supervision to collaboration. I think it's just collaboration, and changed the statute in the state of Ohio. And then subsequent, about a year later, Governor Mike DeWine, who I learned through a little bit of interesting background, he was actually a senator, I believe, previously. The fact checkers will be commenting on this. He was a senator who actually tried to implement federal supervision in federal statute many years ago. So this is an interesting position. But Ohio is now the 27th opt-out state, so that is official. Now Vermont was just last week. And first, for reaction, what do you think, Randy? Is this going to change? You guys are in Ohio, right?
Yeah, North Star is. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a pretty sizable footprint.
What's your initial reaction with this change in Ohio? And I know we talked about this last week, but it bears repeating. So let's get into it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting where you see two states opt out in a 24 to 48 hour period. I don't know that there's any necessary correlation there to talk about, other than it's probably a bad day at ASA headquarters. So I think practically speaking, I think it's a good signal of that. I would think about this as, how is healthcare trying to position itself around increasing productivity and access to care? I think that those are probably the issues they're trying to solve, and opt out is one of the mechanisms. As we talked about before, opt-out, there's some question around how much does it actually improve access, how much does it actually improve cost of care, and what are the quality implications, which I think most of those questions or all of those questions are probably going to be definitively unanswerable just based on the way things play out in anesthesia. I do think it is an intriguing pattern. And I think, the more that we are talking about opt-outs, the more I tend to think about this as a managing the perception of stakeholder solution. So meaning how do surgeons and hospital
Yeah, what do you mean
administrators,
by that?
yeah, so how do they, I think specifically around liability. So if you're working in a CRNA only model, and to be clear, I'm going to conflate some issues here because this is how it's conflated in the real world. I mean, we're talking about Medicare reimbursement policy versus commercial reimbursement versus practice models versus state. I mean, it gets complicated very quickly. And so, sometimes I get confused, honestly, in terms of how this all intersects. But I would say that a lot of what opt-out is an attempt to manage the perception of liability by the surgeon and the hospital administrator, because when you see in federal statute or reimbursement policy a requirement for quote-unquote physician supervision, that I think that is a bit of an obstacle. And I think this is, another attempt to do that. Now, whether that practically changes access to care or cost of care, who knows? And there's a bunch of debate, and there's conflicting data coming from the usual suspects on this. But I do think it's intriguing. What I'd like to see, or what I'm curious to see, is are we going to see more states fall in line? Like what was unique about the Vermont situation versus the Ohio situation? Is this a signal of like a broader pattern of change in these states that are looking for ways to increase access and decrease cost of care, especially in rural and underserved areas within the state?
Yeah, it's the impact is we'll get into the impact a little bit in a little bit. But Gary, what are your thoughts here? You've been watching this happen. You've been watching this happen since the Clinton years, right? When it was Clinton first and then Bush, right? And for any of you Gen Xers or Gen Zers that are listening, Bill Clinton was a president. Yes, yeah, William Jefferson Clinton was a president of the United States. We got to go way back. What do you think, Gary? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think this is just the sign of the times, right? I think the tide is moving that direction. And again, it's all due to the shortage, right? So, and I think, Randy probably gives some of these folks too much credit, is these legislatures and government, they don't understand it deep enough. And they hear, well, Vermont passed the bill and allowed an opt-out state, so why don't we do it as well? All they're hearing is, we can't get anesthesia providers, and we're having a problem in our state. So it's a quick switch to flip, and they feel like this is going to be a quick fix to the problem, when it really isn't. I mean, the workforce is shrinking, and anesthetizing locations are increasing. So, you're really just you're putting your finger in the dam here by allowing these opt-out states to occur, but you're still going to have the same issues. So I think it's just an easy thing to pass, and they move on. So I would expect more and more states will continue to go the same route that Vermont and Ohio are.
Yeah, it's interesting. Couple thoughts. I worked with full disclosure. I mean, let me start with two observations. First of all, anesthesiologists are never ever going away. like they are mission critical to this system. And I think that bears stating, because this often generates a lot of my team versus your team type stuff. The other thought I had with this is, as more states have opted out, anesthesiologist demand, or to use the preferred nomenclature, physician anesthesiologist, okay, anesthesiologist demand has gone up. So I'm not saying it's causal. I am saying it correlates. And I am saying that when I look at the commentary online, there's a mild undertone of financial concern. Like, am I going to be still relevant? And what I want to observe is that the demand and value of anesthesiologists is inherently not dependent on federal regulation or state law. And that's like, we spend so much time on this stuff, and the ASA opposes it, ANA proposes it. it doesn't fix local issues, right? I'm not saying I do think it should happen. And I did work with the Ducey administration on this issue. While at the same time, in our practice, we have MD-only models and medical direction models. But it does, I think, Randy, to echo your 2 points just a little bit differently, I think it does make it easier to create higher value within the anesthesia model. And I think the other point that bears repeating here is all anesthesia models have to be local, right? There's no world in which, the ASA or the federal government or whomever is going to really determine or should determine the model. That's my point. I mean, I hope we see more of this only because the more, and I'm not an anti-government person. I feel like I should be saying that now. I'm in my 40s and I pay a lot of taxes. I just genuinely don't feel like the federal government shouldn't be involved in these things at all, or the state government. I told Kelly this and she said, "You sound like a far-right crazy libertarian." And I was like, oh, that's not my goal. In either case, yeah, I think we'll see more of this. It wasn't easy when we did it in Arizona. It was fiercely contested, but I generally feel like anesthesiologists as a society are not using, I don't think, humbly, I would suggest it's not a good use of their time. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with opt-out. I don't know of any others. I'm on all the text threads, people talking about this stuff. I don't know of any others, but any other commentary there, gentlemen? Since we just talked about this last week too.
I'm back to the business side of things. It's just the supply and demand, right? Is the demand is so high and the demand or the supply is not going to meet the demand. I think people will try anything, right? I mean, we'll go opt out states, we'll do whatever, because at some point there needs to be catch up in providers in the market in order to get this crisis to go away. But I think we're going to have this discussion for years. We're years away from getting caught up with supply.
My feel is we're on the back half of this shortage. And I know like people are like, "Oh, that's because your company makes money." And I'm like, that's not how the service sector economy works. Like if our margins are too high, our contracts get bid out and our margins go down. Like that's how the market works. So it's not I'm going to make more money thing. But I feel like we're on the back half of this. And also, Randy, feel free to weigh in on this. But when these opt-out things occur, I think it makes it a little bit easier in the minds of, I don't know, I'm speaking from a lot from anesthesiologist's point of view today, but in the minds of anesthesiologists, it makes it a little bit easier to, instead of being 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, to be 1 to 5, which is a 20% increase, depending on how you measure, 25% increase in coverage that day. Right. I was just speaking to an anesthesiologist towards the end of his career, very casual, far away from the halls of medicine. Great. It's not an uncommon scenario. He does all the blocks. He does all the pre-ops. Sometimes he goes up to 1 to 5, but the CRNAs are quite good. So when he can't fill in, they do the pre-op. It actually works quite well. Right. So, but I think it just makes it a little bit easier to do that. And I think that's where the world should go, because that's a world where it's like, let's maximize value for the patient and safety for the patient. Let's not listen to a dictate from a trade association or the federal government. Clearly, my bias around local controls really coming out here. Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's the way I tend to think about this, like the opt-out in my experience. And so caveat that's with my experience is it doesn't really factor into the calculus that we have internally within my company or our company and the conversations we have with healthcare stakeholders. When we talk about what you're talking about, like what's like, hey, can we take a different look at the practice model? Can we move from a 1 to 3, 1 to 4 model of medical direction to something that is more what I think we use the term zone coverage.
Zone, supervisory, collaborative.
Yeah.
It's all kind of
Mm-hmm. And those conversations happen irrespective of whether or not it's an opt-out or non-opt-out state. It doesn't have a lot of influence. Where I think around the edges, it may have some influence. Is sites that are all CRNA or thinking about moving to all CRNA. And in those sites, and I think that's a pretty small percentage of sites that where they would say whether a state has been opted out or not would be kind of deterministic of what model they go to. So I think we're really talking around the edges of sites and practice models versus like, I don't see this changing in a material way, anything that's going to happen in Ohio or Vermont, maybe around the edges in a few facilities. Now, if you zoom out, maybe that's a different answer. Maybe If you look at it
Yeah.
over across 25-year time horizon, and nobody does
Right.
that in healthcare. Healthcare, we typically think in 5 months. So
Mhm.
if you think of maybe, but who's going to measure that? And who's going to, and so I think there is a little bit of this, which is, I agree directionally, stupid rules should be removed, and seems as though this is a reasonable solution there. But I don't know, how that's going to. I guess I'm a little bit on the skeptical side in terms of whether
Sure.
this is going to result in a significant sea change of CRNA or physician utilization.
Real quick on this topic of, does it really change things? And this is cool that we're getting this deep and really talking about it in a nuanced way. Arizona's kind of an outlier, right? But it's instructive because there's so much. Again, I mentioned this before. 3 major groups all doing QZ billing, all have anesthesiologists, right? Gas probably has the most because they do the most hospitals. But if I answer the question, if this happened in all 50 states, would it make a difference? I think the answer is probably. I think you are correct. It would be it's obviously rural sites, it's underserved sites. But then I answer another question: would the role of anesthesiologists diminish? No, like it wouldn't. It would likely expand. And Gary, I'll move to you here. I will say one of the other big mistakes we make in anesthesia is it seems like policy debates are centered around the concept of all providers are the same, all CRNAs are the same, and all anesthesiologists are the same. There are vast differences in talent levels. There's a gulf between high performance anesthesia clinicians and moderately low performance. In where I grew up, where we used this model, we all had to be high performance, and I'm going to speak really plainly here. We had folks come from the East Coast CRNAs who had never pushed their own drugs, and they didn't last. They couldn't operate in our practice, and we have a mixed MD CRNA practice. So I add that level of nuance around the local idea. Go ahead, Gary. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think honestly, I agree with Randy. This is more like background noise, right? It's on the fringes, but I do not think we're on the downslope of the shortage. I think it's going to stay as bad or get worse. And from a macro perspective, you see these health systems are becoming mega systems, right? And what they're trying to do to stay relevant and continue to grab the right patient mix, they're building micro hospitals, right? I have a house in Florida and I have a house in Pittsburgh, and it looks like the Starship Enterprise near my house in Pittsburgh. It is this micro hospital.
Is it the Starship Enterprise or is it the Death Star? Is it like more of an Empire type of,
right? I feel like I'm going to the Ritz-Carlton to get
that's cool.
my colonoscopy, right? And they're doing the same thing all around Florida. So you're going to keep if you can increase the supply, there's going to continue to be more anesthetizing sites, which is going to keep the shortage going. And until because what's going to eventually happen is you're going to have these mega health systems, right? They're going to cross state lines. You're going to have huge health systems, which I think is already happening. And it's going to continue to force this shortage. You're going to need to figure out a way. And again, I'm an anti-government guy as well, but you're going to need to figure out how.
I'm not anti-government. I'm just pro. I like my governments as small as possible.
But you're going to have to open up these residencies, and you're going to have to open the pipe to get more supply in the marketplace. And anything that goes through these regulatory organizations take forever. So that's what's going to have to happen to change, in my opinion. There needs to be more residency spots for MDs to get more anesthesiologists into the marketplace. More CRNA schools are going to have to keep cranking out providers. But I think we're in such a shortfall of staff. Even if you open up the pipes as much as you can, it's still going to take years to get caught up because you keep having micro hospitals open up. And,
sure.
I like
More
going to a micro
anesthetizing
hospital.
sites.
Yeah,
More sites.
I like going there. It's a lot easier, right? I don't have to pay for parking. I don't have to drive into the city. I pull up 10 minutes before and I go into the hospital. So it's going to be bad for several years. I think so.
My perspective there is based upon, Phoenix is the 5th biggest metro in the country, and we're pretty active there and connected in the market there. So, we had to stop hiring new grads because we had so many people have moved here. So it's a different market. Florida's, I think, still short, right? Many, many people have moved there as well. But I think that's, again, it comes down to local groups. the consolidation point's probably a good segue here, because this week, moving on to issue number 2 here, this is certainly, I'm sure, Coronis, Gary, you guys, I saw your email come out on this week. CMS proposes a decrease to anesthesia payments in 2027, also making some changes to MIPS reporting. Let's kind of bottom line it here for the audience. Conversion factor is going down. Most the alternative people reading on the screen will see the word or the acronym APM. That's alternative payment model. Most groups are not in those, at least as far as I know. Conversion factor is down 1.38%. You add that onto inflation of, say 2%. Now we're looking at, 3, maybe even 4% decrease relative with anesthesia conversion factor, which is somewhere between, for most groups, somewhere between 40 to 70, even 80% of the mix of the patients that are coming through. Then the quality program is also changing. And Gary, we'll come to you first here. The PON combination therapy is out. Apparently everyone's getting enough PONV treatment, and they're adding measures around patient-reported experience with anesthesia and intraoperative hypotension. All right, so the big news is that anesthesia conversion factor is going down once again.
It's like Groundhog Day. Every year it's the same thing, right? So the good news for the industry, though, is when you're talking about $20, right? 2% increase in $20 or 2% decrease in $20, it doesn't really move the needle very much. It doesn't really factor into budgets, et cetera. So the whole industry is still relying on commercial carriers, right? As for the MIPS, you do know they upped the threshold several years ago. So most providers don't even participate anymore, right? I've done an analysis recently of 50 providers. One did enough cases that he has to report to MIPS.
Just for the sake of the audience, can you give the quick rundown? What's MIPS, the quality reporting, the whole thing?
Okay. Yeah, MIPS was created several years ago. And what a lot of people don't realize, it's only for Medicare patients, which are straight Medicare, meaning if it is Blue Cross, Medicare Advantage, that doesn't count, right? So there's a very small percentage of patients that are just straight Medicare nowadays. And the original threshold, I believe it was $30,000 a year, maybe it's $35,000 a year in Medicare allowances, which means if you see a patient as a CRNA billing QZ, that's $200, right? $200 of an allowed payment. And to get to 35,000, you're just dividing 200 into 35,000. So people like you and Randy, you would qualify that you'd have to be participating in MIPS. Years later, they upped it to 90,000 because I assume Medicare realized that you're not going to really save money on anesthesia, right? If my mother needs to get her gallbladder removed, anesthesia is not really an option, right? They're not going to say, Mrs. Keeling, here, bite on this bullet and you'll be fine, or here, drink a shot of whiskey and you'll be fine. So there's no way to cut costs on the anesthesia side. So they upped the threshold for reporting, and now you throw in Medicare HMOs that don't count.
Right.
I know very few providers now that even participate in MIPS.
That's fascinating.
Some groups will do it as a group, because the upside for a group is that's something you can market. You can say, hey, we are a quality provider according to Medicare. And when they go to pursue new contracts, they can hang a little feather in their hat with that. But in general, it's really becoming a non-factor. This annual cut and the MIPS, it doesn't really matter much anymore.
Yeah. Randy, what do you think? Cut again.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different things that are, I think, happening here. One is that the valuation of anesthesia services has been flawed since its conception. And then there is Congress every year has to kick the can down the road on draconian cuts. So the 2.5% cut is for 26 is going to sunset unless Congress does something. So that's going to impact not just anesthesia, but across the board, physician and advanced practice provider reimbursement that's a real challenge, and there's I think probably some decent amount of speculation that there will be another legislative fix, which would result in kicking the can down the road a little bit down on that. The other thing is, we're we're talking about this also in the context of value-based care. Like like anesthesia's role in value-based care as conceived by CMS is profoundly stupid. I mean, if you look at value-based care models are for longitudinal patient care episodes.
Yeah.
So primary care
Yeah.
physicians, internal medicines, cardiologists, etc. The way that we interface with a patient is 2 hours plus a little bit of PACU time, right? And so they're trying to squeeze a round peg into a square hole. And then, like these MIPS measures were always a joke. The evolution of this program is going to continue to be a joke because we don't fit into that model. And because so we are proceduralists. We're involved in the care of a patient in a very limited window. And yes, they'll say, well, there's decisions that I make in the operating room that have impact on 30-day mortality and morbidity. Okay, that's fine. But how are you identifying and quantifying those? Which is why, they're moving towards intraoperative hypotension. I'm still highly skeptical. I don't think value-based care, MIPS, in the context of anesthesia, has moved the needle on patient outcomes one bit. I am equally skeptical of what the next evolution of what this is going to be. This is a check-the-box exercise in order to prevent your reimbursement from being impacted if you are, meet those criteria. So if we were really thinking about, how do we position anesthesia in a way that helps healthcare, it is around, I think, operational efficiency. That's what I would put our butts on the line, which is how, throughput throughout the operating room, first time starts, all of that stuff, that doesn't necessarily directly impact patient care, but it does impact financial performance.
Right, and ultimately, those two things are intimately connected, right? You perform better on the finances, you make better use of taxpayer dollars, more patients get care, and the care is generally pretty good. But I mean, basically, you're saying that the MIPS program has, effectively no impact. I would tend to agree. Are you suggesting we just, not use it? I mean, get rid of it? Is that the?
I think in the context of anesthesia, I think it's profoundly misguided, and I think that they're like, well, we got to do something for anesthesia. Let's do this, and this is what they've done. But I don't think any serious person, and I don't consider myself a particularly serious person when it comes to being a
life.
Almost anything, including quality outcomes in anesthesia. But I think any remotely serious person, if you ask them, has the MIPS program in the context of anesthesia had an impact on patient care or patient outcomes, they would laugh. They would say, absolutely not. This is a check the box exercise that was conceived by the federal government because they're like, oh shit, what about anesthesia?
Well, it's funny, Randy, you're on the right track there. So the company I work for, we created our own registry, right? Because these companies came out and everyone was running around that, oh my goodness, MIPS is coming. And these companies grew out of nowhere and they would charge you $800 a year to gather your information or more. The ASA was charging, I believe, free for members, and it was $1,500 for CRNAs. So we just built our own registry and we include it in our fees. But what it's migrated to, it is a customizable quality capture mechanism for our clients now, right? So you can say, I want to track on-time starts. I want to track patient nausea, et cetera, et cetera. And we allow you, it's just internally reported now. So we keep our own registry. We can report back to you. You can report back to your facility. So
you replaced ePreop effectively, right? Isn't that the company that a lot of companies were using, ePreop?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And when the threshold went up, the need for that service really disappeared, right? Because most people don't qualify anymore. So why do you want to bother gathering it? Our registry, though, would be collecting dust if we didn't figure out another way to use it. So we offer that we'll track whatever you want us to track for you, and we'll report it back to you. You can report it back to the hospital. And with subsidies nowadays, everybody's getting a subsidy. The hospital wants to hang their hat on that subsidy some way, right? We want you to track this, and this. We do it. We report it back to the group who reports it back to the hospital. But you would need someone of Randy's training or his experience to get a job with the government to explain what do we really need to gather for anesthesia. And, I don't know if anyone out there wants that job, but I think, you could go to work for Medicare and, get something done that way. But I don't know if anyone wants that job because it sounds kind of boring.
My take here is that, number one, Gary, your point on, does this really matter? And no, it doesn't, because so many groups have some sort of, guarantee of their threshold, their revenue, et cetera. So reimbursement goes down. It just shifts more pressure payer to subsidies to the commercial end. The other thing this goes back to is that it just gets increasingly, as the differential, again, is the relative newcomer, I think, compared to you guys. I think I'm a little bit earlier, not much, but a little. What this does, I think, is just it makes it harder and harder for startup groups to get rolling, right? Because they are now increasingly dependent on subsidies as well. When I started what was then AZAS, we lived off fee-for-service for many, many years in many, many scenarios. And it wasn't until around 2020, maybe 21, 22, like everything went subsidized effectively, except for a few rare, ultra high volume facilities. And then even in those, we had to, make sure they weren't doing an illegal company model. But I digress. But the point I'm making is, as
they still exist, Joe. By the way.
Yeah. That's all.
Now it's a whole other subject.
Randy, in your role, you probably don't, because you're not on the business development side as much, right? But at my end of things, I have those conversations, and I've been literally asked for a kickback numerous times. Like the phrasing was, one time it was, well, what about the profit share? And I said, we do profit sharing, we do bonuses for our group members, and they're like, no, for us. And I was like, what do you mean? And another one was like, well, I was canceling a contract. I was like, hey, we're subsidizing, or the ortho guys are giving us, $250,000 a room or whatever. I was consulting for this group, and you're giving us nothing, and you're taking all this profit that we should have, so we don't have to take so much from the ortho guys. And they were like, yeah, we'll give you the billing, but what's in it for me? And that conversation went back and forth a number of times. And well, we don't have that relationship anymore. So that's but still legal, and there's plenty of cases out there. I digress. It's one of my pet peeves because we're in that segment of the market. But yeah, back to this anesthesia conversion factor. I think it just leads to more and more consolidation, right? And this North Star, our group will be fine, because we're at that much, North Star is much, much larger and much more mature in that sense. It just gets hard to get things off the ground.
Then the other, just to the double down on the point, like this will ultimately be passed through to the facility.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Is this hurts the facility at the end of the day? That's really what hurts.
Yeah. And ultimately, when healthcare is funded, and this is what I enjoy about our conversations, because you can connect it to some broader ideas. When healthcare is funded by the taxpayer, and you look at state governments, you look at federal governments, something like, I think in Arizona it was like 30% goes to healthcare funding or something like that. And talking to my local senator a couple months back. Ultimately, it's the taxpayer that funds these things, and that's why I think it's incumbent upon leaders to make the full use. The whole framework around this MD CRNA thing is, kind of my team versus your team, right? But I think a better framework is, are we making full use of every professional that we have? And that varies quite a bit, right? Some folks are not as skilled as others. Some are quite bad, right? So they need a lot of oversight. But other folks are quite talented, and we should use those talents, because ultimately it's everybody on this phone call who's, paying for our services. Now, I sound, I'm going to start a new organization, Anesthesia Providers, Friends of the Taxpayer, Anesthesia for Friends of the Taxpayer. Keep going, Randy.
We talked about incentives before. So show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
So the government has created this incentive program. We build a mousetrap in order to maximize our revenue, like anyone else would. And so the current incentive is making sure that you have the internal infrastructure to maximize your revenue on a program that doesn't really impact patient care or patient access. That's the current state of play in anesthesia. It's a joke, right?
Mm-hmm. When you say that, are you referring to the MIPS thing?
The MIPS, the value-based program relative to anesthesia.
Oh, sure, got
it. Is a joke. Now, if we were really serious about solving problems in healthcare, which is about access, cost of care, and efficiency, and the government wanted to create a program where groups that optimize access to care, cost of care, and perioperative efficiency, now that's moving the needle. It's because it's creating an incentive plan where you're going to force groups who are immune to their poor utilization because they have a big subsidy if you say, hey, actually, based on the clinical resources you have, CRNAs, anesthesiologists, whatever, you're not a particularly productive group, and you had at-risk reimbursement from the federal government, then you would see practice models change pretty quickly, and you would see
rapidly.
You would see perioperative efficiency improve. And I understand that anesthesia is not the only input here. The biggest stakeholder is the surgeon, which is why I would put them and the hospital at risk as well. Then you're actually moving the needle in a real way, where anesthesia is particularly well positioned to move the needle.
Indeed. Yeah, that's a great point. We're not incentivized to make full use of our resources currently.
Yeah.
Right. And that, like, we're, especially with the like almost philosophical, I mean, it's the deep turf war thing. I see it play out at the local level. I get phone calls, not in our group, thank God, we're effectively apolitical, but at other practices, it gets political. And then the incentive is, I want my team to win versus I want to create the best experience. Gary, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything Randy said. This is really more just of a nuisance, a checkbox thing. And I work for the biggest billing company in the country, and we still run into local groups that are with a local billing company, and they'll say, hey, what I hate about billing the most is filling out these silly MIPS forms. And there's a lot of providers in the market that still are, the ones that are doing it don't realize they don't have to do it anymore. So it's really a wasted program when it comes to anesthesia. I mean, whatever the government's spending to administer the anesthesia portion of it, it's kind of a waste of taxpayer money.
It's unfortunate. There's a whole conversation here on government incentives, but and social contract, which is maybe a good segue. So in the news,
before we go there,
go ahead.
We can cut this off. Joe, have you ever attempted to talk to a patient about smoking abstinence?
No, we should definitely keep this in. See, we're actually having it's funny. That's a meta conversation. We're debating what should stay in. It's great. It shows we're having fun. And by the way, I get good feedback on that aspect of things. Like, that's part of the working theory of the show, is people enjoy our sense of humor. I actually talked to an anesthesiologist who was like, he's very earnest and he's almost a voice guy. He's like, it's an important question to ask. And now I ask it in my preoperative interviews. And I was like, I'm a bad person. I never, ever do that.
In the history of humankind, has anyone ever been talked out of smoking right before they have a procedure? Like, oh shit, I hadn't really thought about that until the CRNA or anesthesiologist mentioned it. Maybe I should stop smoking. Yeah, this is an example of like just the ridiculous nature of these, like smoking. Oh yes, do I check the box? I check the shit out of the box. But do I actually have a conversation with a patient who's been smoking for 35 years before they're going to have their below the knee amputation about stopping smoking? Is that my role as a proceduralist, as an anesthesia provider? And even if I did, would that change that patient's
probably not
decision making? Of course not. I mean, that patient has had, I'm sure, dozens of conversations with people who are better positioned than me. And this is an example of, why does this shit make it into the program? Why is this something that you measure and being held accountable? Because I can guarantee you, I check the box 100% of the time. Am I having those conversations? 0% of the time.
It's a passing comment at best.
Yes. Not even that. Yeah. So,
and it's not even funny, but how about when you walk into the hospital, you see people out there in their gowns with the cigarette hanging out of their mouth, waiting outside, and you're like, you just had an operation and you lit it up right after that. So the whole thing is silly. It really is.
The thing I would add here is that the world is small, and someone hopefully is listening to these things. I mean, I know Lee Fleischer is involved in the anesthesia side at CMS. Maybe they see something that we don't, but I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like it. So I think the conversation on incentives in anesthesia, getting to a more pragmatic way of doing things is wise. And hopefully somebody out there is listening or future leaders of CMS are listening. Also, moving on to our next segment, UnitedHealthcare, everyone's favorite American company, posts a $5.5 billion profit for those
good for them.
Who can.
I was worried about.
Oh my gosh! Yes. They were suffering. This is from Becker's, the news aggregator. And I did verify this with Forbes as well. $5.5 billion in profit for the second quarter of 2026, up sharply from the same period of last year. They appear to be a public, I wasn't certain of this, but they appear to be a publicly traded company. So their adjusted earnings per share has gone up. Revenue was $112 billion for the 3 months prior, or that ended June 30th, which was essentially flat. So they lowered costs. Margin went up to about 7%. Just for the, Randy, we'll come to you first here, but just to give an even view, a little bit of a balanced view, try to steel man the argument a little bit. And for those who are not trained in really esoteric verbal arts, steel man versus straw man, right? Trying to understand both sides of an argument. 7% is not a large margin, right? I mean, that's not a large margin for like a plumbing company or something like that. That's not a lot of breathing room. A lot of bad things can happen. However, $5.5 billion is an awful lot. And look, when we look in the societal context of this, it's a tough sell, right? It's constant denials. You see all the videos of surgeons calling insurance companies dealing with this, which is crazy that surgeons are dealing with that. That's not what they should be doing. So Randy, we're going to come to you first. UnitedHealthcare, $5.5 billion.
Like I said, I'm really excited for them. This is really good. I hope their bonuses are as fat as possible. I mean,
oh my gosh.
I mean, $5.5 billion in one quarter. Jeepers. Wow. That's just awesome. So, I mean, I think if I were slightly less sarcastic, I think there's a conversation around, and again, I tend to be pro competition, let the market figure things out. And UnitedHealthcare has positioned itself in a way to benefit from their positioning in the market. So the challenge here is I can't be completely objective because I'm on the other end of this in that, some portion of that $5.5 billion in the second quarter of 2026 came from me. So,
that's right.
And so,
and you guys use United?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of my role within the company I'm in. So, so I think there is this is all kind of academic conversation until you have to butt up against them as a patient or as a provider or as a company owner. Then you realize they have structured themselves as to optimize and extract as much value as they can out of the healthcare system. And we can argue about whether that's appropriate or not. Again, you show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And I think it's probably, in a weird way, it's less of a criticism of UnitedHealthcare and more of a criticism in terms of how healthcare is structured in the United States, that a company can position itself and extract that much value from the healthcare system when we've been talking over and over again about the financial problems and headwinds that we have in healthcare.
Gary, what's the chatter over at the water cooler in Coronis with UnitedHealthcare making $5.5 billion?
I should probably recuse myself from this discussion. The good news is they are a very well-run company, right? They make the hard decisions on a daily basis, right? If money's down, they lay off 5,000 people, right? It's a ruthless organization. So if you want to be an investor, it's a good company to invest in because the stock's always going to go up. But I worked for a company that was taken over by UnitedHealthcare, and we had 6,000 employees. I bet you there's 10 of them left there now, right? So, they run a very good business, but I agree with Randy. It's just really a profit center, and they've worked their way into the marketplace, and they know where to put their money, and they know where to generate profits. And, at this point, I don't know how you fix it, right? They have become such a Goliath that I don't know. It always boggles my mind is you meet with hospital administrators and they're either barely breaking even or they're losing money every year. And then you have one of the biggest vendors to the healthcare system that's making record profits every year. And it's not just UnitedHealthcare, it's all the health insurance companies. So it's a sad state of affairs, in my opinion.
Honestly, when I see these headlines, I think of two things, which is first, when I see Zohran Mamdani and other democratic socialists winning, and again, I'm approaching this carefully because people are very sensitive about politics and these issues, and our country is in such a hot place, right? But I like to pay attention, and I think, again, it's incumbent upon leaders to be at least aware of these things and to try to lead effectively through these dark times. When UnitedHealthcare is making $5.5 billion in profit, and Democratic socialists, who are not Democrats in the traditional sense, right? They're not the your old school Democrats. They're socialists more so, which effectively means public ownership of goods and services. And I think socialism is very misunderstood. Scandinavian countries often get quoted, Switzerland, Germany, et cetera. These are not really socialist countries, as it were. They're more like social capitalists, capitalistic countries that have for-profit healthcare systems, but they have very strong safety nets. But when I see this headline and I think of those elections going on, and I think of people suffering relative to their peers, relative to their consumers, they don't feel like they're doing well. This tells me that the social contract needs improved, right? And the other half of that is when we have very strong opinions about politics in this country, we often mistake the lack of execution on a given idea or a given principle. And this doesn't matter if you're running, a large anesthesia company or you're a politician or whatever. If you have an idea that, a company should run well or a government should run well and in a certain way, and you fail to execute, I think what's happening right now is in the citizenry is people are saying, well, it's your idea that's bad, right? It's the idea that, you see some of this chatter, right? No, none of these big companies should exist or anything like that. It's like, capitalism is evil and all these sorts of things. And it's like, no, we're seeing a corrupted form of capitalism where people are not healthy, right? People are not getting care in a timely, accessible way, right? We see those stories. It's a general feeling out there. But companies, like these ultra large, these things are 100 times our size, are making all this money. That tells me the system is broken. It doesn't tell me that a free enterprise system, which is probably more accurate characterization, is flawed as an idea. It tells me that the application of the idea is flawed. And socialism is not inherently evil per se, right? I mean, that can work, especially in smaller countries. That can go well, or it can go very, very poorly, right? So I think that's what I think about when I see UnitedHealthcare posting $5.5 billion in profits. And when we're partnering, we're partnering with other groups and trying to build economies of scale, or in North Star's case, doing more organic growth, or in USAP's case, trying to buy up everything in a given market. This is why they're doing it, right? I mean, all those behaviors are a very natural reaction of, in an ideal world, healthcare is lightly regulated, but effectively regulated, right? We want the right guidelines to produce the right incentives to get good outcomes for the citizenry. And so I just, I feel discouraged when I see this, because oh man, this just pours fuel on the fire of these kind of extreme parts of our society. It's not a good thing.
I think it's also, there's a natural tension that exists, I think, like in this conversation around, what is the role of government regulation in all of this? And I don't pretend to know what the right answer is, but if there is a compelling indication that the amount of value a company is extracting is disproportionate to the value that it brings the marketplace and the customers or the key stakeholders, then I would say, there is a larger role for the federal government here on regulation. And this is the kind of the threshold we've seen in the tension around, anti-competitive, anti-monopoly legislation back towards, Theodore Roosevelt, breaking up, mega companies. And I'm not proposing, at least not right now, UnitedHealthcare needs to be broken up. But,
Sure.
there's
an idea out there, though.
There's an idea. And there's a hard conversation here. Like, what is the value this company brings beyond its investors and its employees and its executives? And what are its policies and practices, and how is that impacting healthcare's most important segment, which is the patients? And I think there is a lot of questions here that need to be answered. And I know it's a slippery slope when you talk about government intervention. And to be perfectly candid, like UnitedHealthcare owns Congress and the White House.
Yeah, highly influential.
Yeah. So any government intervention is a bit of a stretch right now, whether it's appropriate or not. but I think it's an important conversation we have, considering the economic headwinds we have in this country relative to healthcare spending.
Indeed. Gary, any thoughts? Any further thoughts here?
No, it's just one of
It's
those
enough,
things.
right?
I don't even know where I would start. You know, I mean, we're down to really four major companies now: United, Blue Cross, Aetna, and Cigna, and arguably Cigna's the smallest of all of those. The competition is getting more limited every day.
We all understand the value. Everybody here, we've all competed against or with each other on some level. Yeah, the system's got to improve, and again, this is about the rest, right? I think a lot of this goes back to like Citizens United, right? This is a little bit far out, but we got to get money out of Congress and elections. Let's get back down to some anesthesia-specific items here, going over to the ASA, the American Society of Anesthesiologists. July 15th submitted their rural health care bill, right? This is from Dr. Greg Murphy in North Carolina, some other congressmen as well. But effectively what this does, it's a bill right now, current state, we'll get your reaction here, guys, in a moment. Current state, if a very small hospital has less than 800 cases, they can change their reimbursement mechanism and effectively get higher reimbursement, specifically for CRNA services. This would allow anesthesiologists to be eligible for that function as well. And Gary, we'll start with you. Any reactions on this bill? I don't know how likely it is to pass or not, but I know they've tried this more than once.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a good effort, right? It's all based off of Medicare rates. So I believe the real numbers are, let's just say $20 a unit for Medicare across the country, right? It varies, but 20, let's use 20 as a round number. I believe they pay like 26 in these rural facilities. And again, it's a 20% higher than or 30% higher than the normal Medicare rate. But when you're talking in small numbers, big percentages of small numbers are still small numbers, right? Does that make sense, right? Like, so
Indeed.
You're going to get an extra $6 a unit. They're 10 unit cases. You're going to get an extra $60 a case. It's a good effort, but I just don't know if it's going to relieve the pain for these community care hospitals. It's just, I just don't know. It doesn't seem like it's going to do a whole lot.
The phrase 100% of nothing is still nothing, right? Just small amounts. Randy, any thoughts here?
I'll be generous here and say I think the strategic thesis here is that if you open up pass-through to anesthesiologists, you'll have more anesthesiologists going to these rural and underserved areas. Because right now it's the vast majority are CRNA only. I think that's a long putt. Even if this was passed through, pardon the pun, even if this was, moved to the president's desk and he signed it, my hunch is that you're not going to see a material increase in anesthesiologist coverage in these rural and underserved areas. I think there are geographic issues. There are opportunity cost considerations here that when you do the math, that it actually still doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for the anesthesiologist, and it doesn't make sense for the hospital to bring in anesthesiologists. So this is another one where if you looked at this purely from a political or partisan perspective, the anesthesiologists are going to like it and the CRNAs are going to hate it. Mm-hmm. I would invite us to think about it in a slightly different way, which is what are the practical implications here? Does this increase access to anesthesia care in rural and underserved areas? And the answer is going to be no. Will rural and underserved hospitals aggressively move towards trying to recruit anesthesiologists because now there's this new funding mechanism? The answer is going to be no, because they're going to do the math.
Absolutely not.
That the all-in cost still is not worth it. Will anesthesiologists all of a sudden decide that, hey, I can make $600,000 working in Dallas-Fort Worth, or I can go to the middle of nowhere, Texas, and make the same amount of money, or maybe a little bit less, actually, unless the hospital covers
really kicks in.
Will they start to migrate into those areas? The answer is going to be no. So I think there is, this is one of those things, from a partisan perspective that gets people's blood boiling. But at the end of the day, whether this thing passes or not, it's going to have no material impact on anesthesiologist employment in rural or underserved communities. Full stop.
I get requests for people to provide revenue projections for new facilities all the time, probably 100 a year. I've had one group ask me about a rural hospital that would fall under this.
Mhm.
And they chose not to do it anyways, right? Because the numbers just don't make any sense, right? When you have a shortage and you're having trouble getting people anyways, do you really want to send them an hour and a half out to the sticks? It doesn't happen. It's just at this point,
The-
it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, indeed. I think you guys have said it all in this. I doubt it'll pass, right? For a whole host of reasons, and I doubt it'll pass because the framework. And to keep my eye on the time, this is going to be my thought of the week on this rumination section. Moving on here, I doubt it'll pass because the framework of the last 100 years, so to speak, has been generally how do I limit the value of that other group, right? Like that's what. And I think it's fair to say that the ASA, which is a powerful and well funded, and they've done a lot of good in the world. This is not a criticism; it's an observation. A big part of their agenda has been putting these supervision laws into place, all that sort of thing. I already said I don't think laws really protect them. Their value is inherent, right? There's value to that profession for American society. There's no doubt about that. But the faster we can get, and this is part of the reason we have this show, is try to have this conversation. The faster we can get away from how do we limit value to instead focusing on how we grow the pie and increase the value proposition of our members, of our community, help them do more for patients, help them do more for the system, to grow their leadership capability, to move into new areas. If we start having that conversation collectively, I think it's a much more powerful conversation to have. The low stakes, the kind of the table stakes thing is let's work on reimbursement together. And we should, right? I think we should generally stop using the government to try to influence markets, which is what is really happening, right? Regulatory capture. Get away from that and empower local groups. And then rather than trying to use the federal government to legislate scope of practice, which is crazy, let's talk about competence at the local level. There's plenty of local mechanisms, medical exec, peer review, quality committees. They are going to be much more keen on the competence of their teams than anything that we can come up with that's written into paper at a state capitol or federal law. And again, it's just not what our government does well. Government should do things like long-term funding, big audacious goals, going to the moon, the National Academies of Science. All those things are super important. Social safety nets, of course.
I mean, a lot of our conversations have been focused on the cost of healthcare. And I think that will probably be a trend. And obviously anesthesia is a very small portion of that, but an important portion to this audience. So I happen to think that healthcare has less of a cost issue than most people realize. I think healthcare has a productivity issue. And if we looked at through the lens of how are we maximizing the productivity of the system versus how do we engineer reimbursement in a certain way, I think you're going to have probably some more productive conversation. So if productivity improved dramatically, I think a lot of our financial problems would go away. And whether that's in anesthesia, whether that's in throughput through a physician office or any element within healthcare, if we focused more on how do we improve productivity, not all of our cost conversations will go away, but I think a lot of what we are positioning as cost is actually a productivity problem. And we see this every day in anesthesia, which is they're like, oh, your anesthesia services are too costly. And I said, well, if we compared the cost relative to your productivity, which is often a proxy of OR utilization, we actually don't have a cost problem. You have an OR utilization problem. And I think that is, an issue writ large across healthcare. And I think is often missed in this debate around cost.
Well said. I think one of the big themes is just that we've been talking about. It's high performance, right? It's well-run organizations. It's productivity, and that's the real conversation to have. Gary?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess my thoughts are I don't know where this is going to end, right? Like we talked earlier about more micro hospitals being built, right? So to get more efficient, you're going to need to run more patients through those facilities. And if you keep adding more facilities, you're increasing the inefficiency, right? So, we have an aging population, but we have a birth rate that is either level or negative, right?
I don't think it will change a great deal. I hope I'm wrong, but assuming it does not, I think, and this is I just keep thinking about this. Well, what do we do in the meantime? And then it's like, well, let's make our group, and this applies to the individual and the system. Let's make our group, let's make our community, let's make our organization as effective and high performance as we can be, given this current situation. I think that's a individual responsibility of every functional citizen, right? Like we should be doing those things. That's how the country runs well. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the episode. We are really enjoying these conversations. This is the stuff that no one's ever taught about, that no one talks about. It's connecting these big societal issues to our tiny little world, our tiny little community of anesthesia. So there's a lot of ways to reach out to us. You can email social@abouttherest.com. If you don't like what we said, or you do like what we said, we still want to hear from you. Please send us an email. We will often take that commentary and bring it right into our show. We have a website, abouttherest.com. I'm on all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, etc. So is the podcast. There's some crossover there. Human Content has a podcast family on Instagram and TikTok. You can find their stuff at Human Content Pods. So for all those who have been leaving feedback, thank you very much. We are very appreciative. This is on video. For those listening on Spotify or watching on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, we are on YouTube as well. And finally, I am your host, Joe Rodriguez. On the show today, Randy Moore and Gary Keeling. Our executive producers are myself, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brook. Editing and engineering is by Andrew Sims, and our music is by Omer Benzivi. To learn more about our disclaimer program and ethics policy, our submission verification and licensing terms, HIPAA release terms, you can go to our website, or you can reach out to us at production@abouttherest.com with any feedback, thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, any fun medical puns you want to send our way. About the Rest is a Human Content production.